And our guests are Greg Godos. He is writes for ML Today, and he is a Marxist-Leninist writer. And then we have Larry Sparano, who is a longtime anchor at Fox News Station, and he's an investigative reporter. And both of these guys are still in the business and still working. And Larry, how are you? Where are you calling from?
Well, I am calling 12 miles north of Joe Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, where they've already renamed the street after him, Joe Biden Way, and they're soon going to make his homestead a shrine, I understand. So that's where I'm calling.
And Greg, how are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm good, Ken. I'm calling from Pittsburgh. I get my first shot on Tuesday. So I'm looking forward to it. It's been a bit of a fiasco in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, but I'm glad I've got one coming up. And I'm really glad you scheduled this at 1 Eastern time because my team's playing in the Big Ten basketball tournament at 3:30, and I didn't want to miss it. So I'm really grateful.
Okay, great. So Larry, where do we stand now? How is the state of the nation?
Well, I think the state of the nation is in somewhat disarray and probably will get worse under the acting President Joe Biden. The real president in waiting, I think, is Kamala Harris. Signs of that already are abundant, including her taking phone calls with foreign leaders rather than Biden. And I just think that this administration really is it's not what it purports to be. You know, how deep it goes in terms of other people controlling Biden, I don't know. But it seems obvious to me. I think some of the other people on the call here that cognitively he is challenged. It seems to be getting.
Oh my God! Compared to our other presidents, he's a genius.
Right.
I mean, how could you even say that when we had Trump, who was damaged goods?
Well, I mean, that's a different point, though. I mean, you might not agree with what he did or who he was, but I mean, I think he was mentally coherent.
Well, I don't. He was such a psychotic liar. I don't consider that mentally coherent. I just don't. Sorry.
As I've told them time and time again, we've had this conversation. The only difference between Trump and the other presidents we've had, most of the other presidents we've had, is that Trump is much more obvious about his lies, et cetera, et cetera. The others do it more subtly, but you know, it's the same kind of motive.
They were regular liars. He was pathological. There's a difference.
A pathological liar, by the way, by definition, is a person who tells lies even if there is no benefit to him. In other words,
I think that's him.
He's compelled to lie. I think everything he said, whether it's a lie or not, has had a political effect. You know, well thought out by him. I don't think he's a dumb guy at all. I don't think he's somebody who doesn't have his mental faculties. You may not like the way he uses them, but I think he's extremely sharp.
I'm curious about your position of the kind of like a conspiracy theory that Biden is not what he seems. I mean, I'm familiar with that approach. What is he really that's different from what he seems? And why do you think Kamala Harris is somehow playing a wrong role as vice president?
Well, I don't think it's traditional, especially in the inception of an administration, to have your vice president handling calls with foreign leaders, among other things.
But why is that important to you? What do you gather from that?
I gather that the president of the United States is not really has a handle or even being let in on foreign policy decisions and discussions. I think that's a serious matter.
You do?
Greg, where do you stand on all this?
Well, I tend to agree with Larry. It's an interesting time because obviously the profound deep hatred of Trump has bought Biden a lot of time. Mm-hmm. People have a sense of relief, and I understand that. At the same time, the problems that Biden is facing are intractable, and you know, I think people are sighing in relief, but they're missing the point. The point is that we're getting kind of warmed over Obama here, And that's not sufficient. Most of the people in his cabinet, his advisors come out of the Obama administration. His foreign policy is consistent really with Trump. It might even be a little worse in some ways than Trump's foreign policy. But on domestic policy, clearly, as a left person that wants a lot more than we're being given, I'm kind of surprised that he's given us more than I expected. I think there are some things that Biden has done domestically that surprised me. For example, he sent a message which I think the labor movement urged him to the Amazon workers, a kind of a very timid and weak, but an encouragement nonetheless to those workers. And that's unprecedented. I don't think anybody has done that for a long time. But I think in a larger picture, Biden, and I think Larry's right. I mean, he's kind of resigned to just being a figurehead and the staff kind of runs things, but they always do. But given that, he's on cruise control, and we'll see where that takes us because these problems are intractable. I mean, the economy, the 3 million people that are in forbearance on their mortgages, the other 3 million who stand to lose their apartments. When that opens up, there's still 9.5 million people unemployed, the 2 or 3 million people who have dropped out of the workplace. There's a little happy period right now because of the bailout, but that's going to go away. And then the Biden administration is going to be faced with reality.
Yeah.
It's only been 52 days.
Yeah, I think he's already.
You're asking the guy to walk on water without getting his socks wet.
Well, Larry, let me ask you, is this the reason that we haven't had a press conference with Biden, in your opinion?
I think so. I mean, presidents usually are eager to present themselves and their vision fresh in the administration. It's been, over 50 days now. No press conference. And when he appears for these brief sessions, oftentimes there's stage events, there's no reporters in the room. And if there are questions, they're not allowed. I don't know if you've seen some of the video where his handlers usher him out of the room as soon as somebody starts asking him questions. So, again.
Sounds familiar.
Excuse me?
Sounds familiar.
Trump talked to anybody at any time. You might not have liked the answer.
Right.
But he
He
wasn't.
never told the truth.
But what I'm saying, look, the way I feel about it, none of them tell the truth. It's just that Trump is much more obvious about it. The other ones hide behind rhetoric. They hide behind idealistic statements, vague statements, and it's the same thing. As Greg said, this is Biden administration 2.0, and it's filled with guys from Wall Street, guys from big finance. I mean, this. And I've told Kent this a number of times. I am, although he doesn't believe me, still a lifelong liberal Democrat. But it's not the party that I grew up with, the party that helped the working class, of which I come from. My parents were both factory workers. My whole heritage is working class. And this is not the Democratic Party as it used to be. Clinton was instrumental in changing that when he decided that to get parity for corporate donations, they had to start catering to the corporations. And that's when it all started changing. It's really like a two-headed snake, different parties in name, but pretty much the same approach as we can see with Biden now. All this socialism, all this help for the people. Why is his administration filled with all these money guys?
Well, Larry, do you think that Biden could have done more with the $1.9 trillion legislation that was just passed, considering how close things were in the Senate?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can make the argument that, politics is the art of the possible. You have to compromise. So therefore, he had to allow a lot of the pork barrel legislation. And I think because he is so beholden to so many interest groups, that's going to continue to be a big element in what he presents and what gets agreed to in a divided Congress.
Jeff, what were you going to
It
say?
does require greater agility than if you're only beholden to the top 1%.
Right. Jeff, you had a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
I have a comment, and then I'm probably going to have to get out of this because I've got a brief due. And I cannot recall the name of the British author of the statement, but he said of Franklin D. Roosevelt that he had only a second-class intellect, but a first-class temperament. And I think that that's true of Biden as well. But let's recall Roosevelt surrounded himself with really, really bright guys. William O. Douglas, Burley, guys like that. And unfortunately, a lot of the really, really bright guys in our world have also made a hell of a lot of money. And I just think that to some extent, unless you have enough understanding of financial markets to be brave enough to do something about regulating them, most presidents live in terror of their own secretaries of the Treasury because of out of fear of what they might do. And the only candidate we had available to us who would not have been in that position was Elizabeth Warren, who actually understood right down to a granular level how US and international finance worked. So she would have been able to get in up to her elbows in changing a lot of that. But you know, even Obama was a prisoner of the fact that his 1 year as a securities analyst on Wall Street after he graduated from Columbia was not enough to give him the courage to really go in and do a lot of structural reform of gigantic multinational corporations. And now we've got gigantic multinationals that can only be regulated by a world body that doesn't exist. I mean, you know, what can you do to Google? You can say, okay, you have to carve off YouTube. That won't make any difference. Facebook, ditto. Facebook has 3 billion users. Nobody can regulate Facebook or Google or Apple. So it just seems to me that we're saddled with systems that are really beyond the control of the American government. I think Obama realized that we're only 3 or 4% of the world population, and we cannot control the rest of the world, nor should we try to do so. But I agree with you guys that Biden is not being trundled out for press conferences because they're scared to death of what he might say. And that a lot of this is being done by the people around him. But we've also got a federal government that's so gigantic that that's going to be true to a greater or lesser degree of anybody who's president.
Would the people who are handling Biden were handling Trump?
Well, I'd much rather have Biden's handlers than Trump's handlers. I mean, Trump really got it down to a negative feedback loop where bad news could not travel up. And that meant
Right.
that the decision-making group was Trump, his son-in-law Jared, and Stephen Miller. Those were the guys who were actually making the decisions. That's how you got to a decision to just let coronavirus run wild, because at the time it was only present in blue states, and they thought, well, we can just blame the governors of New York and New Jersey, and it'll be good for us politically. They were so damn stupid that they didn't understand the nature of a pandemic. They didn't have a clue.
They had a clue.
They had a clue.
That was voter suppression, was how they handled the virus.
Yeah, and even that is now broken. Stacey Abrams has broken the code on that.
Well, coming back, the fight's not won on voter
Yeah,
suppression.
she did it once, but can she do it again?
Well, look at what Charles Blow is saying in the New York Times, which is that the Great Migration ought to now be reversed. And
Yeah.
he's moved to Atlanta, and he says,
It is being reversed by many people.
You know, those are fantasies, though.
Yeah, I don't know.
The people aren't just going to pick
yeah,
up. and start
yeah,
voting.
I tend to agree with you. It's not being reversed per se. What is happening is that giant parts of the South are becoming more tractable.
livable.
I mean, you know, you've got two Alabamas. You've got the Alabama of Huntsville, Mobile, and Birmingham, and you've got all the rest. Well, and I did in Tuscaloosa and wherever in the hell Auburn is. I guess at Auburn.
Auburn.
But and those are about evenly balanced. But the part that's growing is the part that is progressive and amenable to doing the right thing. And the part that's shrinking is the uneducated white population in the countryside.
That's well armed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, guys, I would love to stay in this, but unfortunately, I got to go.
All right, talk to you next week.
Bye.
Larry, what do you think?
Thanks, George.
Thanks. Bye.
Well,
Larry, let me ask you a quick question,
Yeah.
which is, if indeed Biden's just a puppet at this point in time and the vice president is pulling a lot of the strings, what do you think of the competency of the vice president?
I think she's very bright, also very ambitious, but I think also she's captive of the special interests.
Well, everybody, you know, in a funny way, you're describing the situation of our country, and it's been
Yeah.
that way for a long time, for as long as I've been aware of it.
Yeah,
And this is nothing special to the Biden administration, I don't think. And yet I feel that what's changed a lot is the Democratic Party. And that's the thing that catches my eye. I mean, he's a little bit more establishment, I think, Biden.
well, I mean, not by the policies that he's promoting. I mean, you know, this, you know, he presented himself as a centrist, and now.
Well, that's what I mean by establishment.
Well, see, this is my point. Yeah, I mean, you know, you keep defending him that, well, you know, what about Trump? What about this? You know, the others are guilty of the same thing. That's what I'm saying, that this really isn't a change. It's the same kind of corporate capture, special interest promotion that we've had under so many administrations. You know, now somebody's saying this is intractable. I don't know if it could be changed. There are existing laws, as I understand it, on the books for antitrust legislation where they could break up some of these huge media monopolies. And I think they should be, because another thing I've talked about Ken a number of times is as journalists and as those of us involved with Media Matters, I think we should all be extremely alarmed at the increasing intensive censorship of the media. Where does this end up? It ends up in state-controlled media, like in 1984, like in Hitler's Germany, in Italy's Mussolini, in China. You know, they control information. And this is a huge danger to the republic. I mean, these so-called journalists now in mainstream media, they're really cheerleaders and propagandists. How come they are not complaining to high heaven about the shutdown of information, the control of information? Something else I've brought up a number of times is a case in point, the Hunter Biden laptop story. Unless you're watching Fox News, and I know most of you guys find that anathema, or if you read the New York Post, there was very few other outlets that even carried the story. Most people I've talked to, my big liberal friends, didn't even know about the Hunter laptop story. And, you know, and again, it's a prime example of how people who used to be journalists used to be anxious to present information no matter who it might help or hurt politically. And that's all changed. John, you wanted to say something? Somebody.
And this is your idea of a liberal Democrat?
Who, Biden, you mean?
Greg, what do you think?
Biden has been in the White House 52 days. And you are excoriating him for not standing in front of the media and doing what he's not good at. And you seem to be slow to congratulate him for doing what no president has done up to now, and what Trump would have fought to his dying breath, which is give money to poor people, to get the economy going and to make them safe in their places of residence.
We'll see how that money is actually applied and the practical results of it. That's yet to be determined, yet to be seen.
No,
The goal.
no, it is not yet to be seen. The money that was given to the rich people ended up in the stock market. Money that's given to poor people is going to end up in A&P and Safeway's pockets. We know that. The first thing poor people do is go for their next meal.
It's an illusion to think that $1,400 check or a $600 check spaced months apart is really making a difference in terms of the fate of poor and working people. It's an illusion to think that the kinds of things in the bill, which are good, which are really good, and with a different Congress, with a different Senate, it probably would not have happened. But it's a serious illusion to think that that really makes much of a difference. And that's a substitute for substantive changes that need to occur in this country
Like what? What
that
do you?
we've retreated from for now generations, literally generations. Well, the income equality in America, I'm sure you're all aware of it. I'm sure you're aware that it's growing and growing, and it's been growing for some time. Well, it's not just a statistic. It's also something that affects people and affects them very, very direly. And where I grew up, just to be a little autobiographical, in the central Illinois, which was a industrial hotbed. It had a General Motors plant, a General Electric plant, et cetera, et cetera. And my family were coal miners in that area. That's now a devastated area of casino, tattoo parlors, and a prison. That's what people do for employment today.
And so what are the people there who get $1,400 going to spend it on? Stocks?
It's not a question of what they're going to spend it on. It's a question of what they need. I mean, we need to kind of think about what people's needs are in this country. And they're well illustrated by the statistics. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you got 3 million people facing that are in forbearance on their mortgage. That means those mortgage payments are building up and building up. Is there something in this relief bill that says that'll be excused? How about student debt? I know numerous people. I try to spend a little bit of time with young people. They get on my nerves, but I try. And I'm appalled and shocked by the amount of student debt that people have accumulated. And these are issues that are apparent. The $15 an hour minimum wage, what that could do for people in this country. And it was pushed off the agenda. It was pushed off the agenda. How about Medicare for all? 70% of the people in this
Republicans.
70% of the people in this country, 70% of the people in this country are for it. And yet we can't even get the bill introduced in the House, which is a Democratic controlled House. It's Jamal said last week, we're not going to go there because Pelosi says that'll interfere with the ACA. I mean, these are things that are real. And so the complacency about Biden being in power now, I understand the relief from Trump. He's a terrible human being, but there's more at stake than having a terrible human being as president. There's a lot at stake in terms of what people's needs are.
I
And
think we
that's
know that.
important.
We know that it's a deadlocked, dysfunctional government.
Well, it's
I
not
think
deadlocked.
I think we know that it's going to be almost impossible to pass anything.
Well, it's
that's-
not deadlocked. It's not deadlocked.
Well, I
mean,
mean,
we
you
saw
can't
that
get
with,
anything through.
well,
You
I
think
would,
you can
I
get
would,
something through the Senate?
yeah, they can do it. They could easily do it. They've
Yeah,
done,
they
they
could,
did
but I
the,
think they will.
well, I don't have the faith. I don't share your faith, but I hope you're right. I know that we had 2 years of a super House and Senate with President Obama, 2 years in which they could override filibusters. They could override them, and they did nothing but the ACA. That's the only real accomplishment. So I challenge the will of the Democratic Party to do
Oh, I
it.
do too. We all do. We all do.
What are we going to do about it? If I
I
could
don't
ask a
know.
question.
Tell us.
Well, what are journalists going to do about it?
They're not doing a damn thing about it. It's all controlled propaganda now. That was my point. And everybody should be extremely alarmed about where we're heading with this. once the government controls information, once you have the Ministry of Information, where do you go for facts? You know, in terms of the internet, there's a lot of crazy stuff on it. There's hateful stuff, a lot of wild conspiracy stuff. However, if you use the internet intelligently, at least up until now, you can get a variety of sources. You could determine the credibility, et cetera, et cetera. That's all drying up now. So you're getting just one official version. The supposedly straight reporting articles in the New York Times, Washington Post, other major publications, they read like editorials now.
Wait a second, there has always been a manufactured press. Blacks could never get into the press in the past. And I don't know what you're talking about. It has always been manipulated.
Not to this
Now
extent.
it's manipulated in a different way, but and it's hurting more powerful people sometimes.
Not to this
But I
extent.
feel that it has always been manipulated, always eliminated information that was unpleasant or unuseful to the powers that be.
Generally, but there was room for contrary opinions to be posted and heard. That's
There
all
still are.
disappearing now. Yeah, it's all-
I think it's happening. There's Fox News.
Larry, do you have a proposal as to how to right this problem? What do you think we should be doing? Or
Well,
the
first-
journalists should be doing?
Well, first of all, you know, this involves First Amendment rights, and of course, they're private corporations. That's the argument, so they can do whatever the hell they want. However, from my understanding, there is existing antitrust legislation been on the books for decades, and it's not being used. And this goes back again to what I'm saying about both parties have all these financial tie-ins. Mitch McConnell, you know, the big Republican, this and that. His wife, Elaine Chao, transportation, the secretary that she was passing or encouraging legislation that benefited the businesses that her family was involved in. So both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of this kind of stuff. It's collusion with the big money, the special interests, and that's why it's only going to get worse unless something happens. And I don't know how to do that. Maybe start to break up the monopolies. And now with the press standing down from a traditional, or preferably, you know, the traditional role that it should have been playing was to be objective, present all kinds of information. That's disappearing. So, you know, where are we going with this? Nobody's going to, less and less challenges now to the big corporations and the special interests on both sides, both Republicans and Democrats.
I don't think it's less and less. I just think it's different. I mean, after all,
Well, it
nobody
should
knew
be
about
fewer
it.
and fewer anyway.
It's just
But
different.
you know that Elaine Chao was a Trump appointee and a Republican.
Yes, yes.
Who is the Democrat that you seem to feel has been doing the same thing?
Obama
Clinton.
and Vice President Biden,
Oh my God.
Bill
Oh my
Clinton,
God.
Bill Clinton.
What businesses do they have that they benefited?
What business interests do they have? Well,
Wall Street,
No,
above
what
all, Wall Street.
businesses?
Wall Street and big real estate.
the Clinton Foundation, for one thing, which I think deserves more exposure and investigation, as so many. Look, both sides, all these guys have tie-ins with special interests, the big money. Now look at China. Biden, all during his vice presidency and his career in the Senate, oh, China's not a problem. You know, they're not our enemy. You know, they're friendly competitors. Prosperity in China will result in prosperity at home. There's no way they're going to eat our lunch. Now he's giving lip service to the argument that, yeah, we do have to be concerned about China, but who built it up? Biden and Republicans both, because they all have their hands into the China businesses that they benefit from.
Well, it seems nothing has changed. It's as Will Rogers said, it's the best politicians that money can buy.
Yeah.
It was true in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, probably the 1830s, 40s, same thing.
Yeah.
But how about jobs? How about getting jobs to the people? Is there any chance that Biden will get into the infrastructure game and anybody on the Republican side will back him up?
Okay, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but if I could respond briefly to that. I think the huge factor here is China. You know, he's talking about bringing jobs back to America, establishing new jobs, new job markets in the U.S. It's not going to happen. China continues to dominate us economically and now militarily with the money we gave them by outsourcing jobs. Now they're building up a huge military. Now they're a military threat. Biden, they have their hooks into Biden. And now there's no way he's going to rein in China and create a lot of jobs in the U.S. because China dominates all these industries now. And, it's like trying to close the barn door once the horses run away. You can't get them back now. There is no incentive for American or multinational companies to bring jobs back here because of the pay differential. They get it made cheaply in China, then re-imported into the U.S. and make huge profits. I mean, that's what the game is all about, and both sides are playing it.
Right, right.
Yeah, but
Alden, you were going to say something.
it's not a-
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. One, I'm kind of interested in the fact that on the one hand, Biden is being accused of being a captive of the special interests. And on the other hand, he's being accused of being a wild-eyed communist, left-winger radical. And I find there's a little bit of dichotomy in there. I'm a little trouble finding that, agreeing with that. So anyway, that's one point. Second, Larry, I think you got a good point in the issue of big organizations and control. And I think we've been through some of these issues over the history of the country. I mean, we got big corporations back in the late 19th century, big oil, and so on. And it took us a long time to figure out that they were bigger than individual states. So the states couldn't control them.
Right.
So we began to get antitrust legislation, and we did something about big oil and some of the others. We had issues with probably big labor. We have now issues with big tech. And the problem with some of these big tech corporations is now you can't regulate them on state level. You can't regulate them on the national level. Somehow it's bigger than that. Apple is worldwide, so is Google, so is Facebook, and so on. So that's a good point, but I don't know what the answer is.
I don't either. I mean, with both parties being in on the take, feeding at the China's trough and the public trough, nothing will change because they all benefit from this. And all this stuff about the social consciousness of Biden and his crew, at least in terms of Biden and his immediate people, it's lip service. They're pandering to all these special interest minority groups and all that. They don't really care about them. They're using them to gain and stay in power. This is pure pandering.
But that's fabulous as far as
To
I'm
gain
concerned.
and stay in
Rather than
power.
having a presidential.
Where were you after the first
Report
50
to white
days of the Trump
supremacy.
administration?
Where was I? You mean in terms of whether I supported them or not? Is that what you mean?
What were you saying about Trump after 50 days? Because you seem to have damned Biden 53 days in and decided that his administration will be of no value except to destroy the country. And I think it's an early diagnosis.
I think that's a little unfair. I think you're being a little bit unfair because in the first month after Trump was elected, there were events all over the country. There was unprecedented mobilization of liberal groups. And I can speak to that because I've always been involved with radical groups who are mobilizing around these times. And I was shocked to see in Pittsburgh, Tuesdays against Tomey, where hundreds of people would show up. This is in the first month. And of course, Trump was demonized because for 27 days, he didn't have a press conference. That's forgotten.
Was Larry demonizing him?
It's forgotten. It's forgotten that the media and people were all over Trump because he's avoiding the press conference. And yet now we have Biden much further, and people are upset about that as well. They should be in both cases. But one side has forgotten that that's what happened before. That in fact is what happened. We have a divided country. And memory will serve you well by going back and reviewing the response to Trump's election. It was very, very strong. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying we have to remember that and put a context. There's no reason to give Biden time we didn't give Trump.
Remember, though, that Trump had his Twitter and he was always twittering all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
And we don't have Biden doing that. I mean, that led many people to abhor Trump. Others
Is that the victory in the election, that we don't have tweets anymore? I mean, it's got to be bigger than that, I hope.
We know lip service is important, though, because at least depends on what is being promised or indicated. It makes a big difference, even if it's not achieved. So even if the goals, the loftiest goals, aren't achieved, even motion towards them, reality, the real world consequences of failing to reach those goals will possibly impel people to figure out ways to get towards them. But to have completely different goals, rotten goals, and of course, Trump, by the psychiatrist, was diagnosed not as a pathological liar, but as a pathological narcissist. And the consequences of having that kind of person, the psychiatrist who wrote the book about him got into. But beside that, I think it's important to have a president and a party who say at least they're trying to feed people, put money in their pockets, et cetera. And then if they don't do it, at least it's up there as an objective.
I completely agree.
You
What-
hold them to it, and that's up to the people, to figure out if they will, in some kind of mass way, move further towards it. The reality is, things are not stagnant. Things are in motion and change all the time. So we can be glad that we have people up there, at least, who are talking such and such a way. It's better than having them be like a Pompeo and a Stephen Miller and all the slime ball
Mnuchin, yeah.
scum who were up there before.
Yeah, I agree.
George Jones, how do you feel?
So I just unmuted myself. I've been listening with great interest and thinking about it. And I'd like to add a little fly to the ointment here. I think that all of the issues we're talking about are extremely important. And 4 years from now, we'll be talking about similar kinds of issues in this context, in these contexts, whatever the new administration might be. But there's one issue that's administration independent, and that, in my opinion, is going to ultimately influence what happens in terms of life on this planet, and that's climate change.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I agree.
I mean, I agree. If I could get off on a little bit of a tangent, I'm curious about Greg being a Marxist-Leninist. Now, do you think that is really workable in any kind of successful society, and how would it come to the U.S.?
Well, of course, it depends upon what you mean by that, and of course, what you envision as the process. In the history of this country, when there has been a radical party, whether it was a populist party or a communist party or a socialist party in the pre-war period, they exerted, even though they were never a majority party, an enormous, powerful influence on the development in this country. For example, I'm finding that there's a number of African-American scholars that are rediscovering today the role of Black communists prior to the civil rights movement. Claudia Jones, William Patterson, the Scottsboro Boys. There's a whole renaissance of interest in that again among a lot of left Black scholars, because they understand the force that was. It's of course been pushed aside and been minimized and forgotten by many people, but it's there. And in my view, the left, if you don't have a left, a radical left, then the center and the center left are always going to be complacent, and they're going to be constantly moving rightward, as we witnessed since the Reagan era. Neoliberalism, the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, comes into existence in order to bring the Democratic Party into the mainstream of Reaganism.
Right.
And imagine that. And that's been going on until late in the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, when they dissolved themselves because they won. And knowing a bit of this history is important because Larry mentioned the Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party he remembers. Well, he's right. And you can document when and how it happened and where it is today. And that's troubling. That's troubling from my very left position because I like to be able to influence that. And I think if we had a left movement in this country, albeit small and not going to win an election, it would definitely influence the party. McCarthyism as an event in US history in the 50s devastated the labor movement and politics in this country. It was essentially a purge of anyone to the left of the Democratic Party, and we're still paying a price for it with our labor movement that's a kind of do-nothing labor movement that would embrace a Joe Biden.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Now we see labor organizing in Alabama with the Amazon workers, and so we see a revived, movement with a lot of promise.
Look at the BLS figures. The BLS figures for strike actions, work stoppages are the lowest they've ever been. They're available online, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's a good event. I support it, of course, wholeheartedly, but it doesn't reflect what's going on with labor in this country. Labor stoppages, people on strike is at an all-time low.
We don't know what's going to we don't know what's going to be the case in 2 to 3 or 4 years.
Well, what's
You're
the
right.
reason for that? Why aren't the workers more fired up? It seems to me that maybe they agree with the people in control in many respects.
Well, you asked the critical question. It opens the door to a lot of things because one of the reasons that the quote unquote white working class backed Trump was precisely that they were looking for options. The devastation in the Rust Belt for the last 30, 40 years is so great that people grasp at straws. And I regret it. We should all regret it. It's a hateful thing. But the reality is that in the key states, the people that voted for Trump in this white working class voted for Obama twice. What does it say? It says that when people said hope and change, they put aside any racism they had for that moment. And I'm not pretending they were not racist. I'm just saying they put it aside because they wanted change. So then they don't get it. Then Trump comes along, they invest in someone else. That doesn't mean they weren't racist there either, but to say it's simply a racist phenomenon is belied by that reality that these votes shifted.
What did they get from Trump?
what they got from Trump was the promise that the working class would no longer be disenfranchised as they were by the Democrats, and that jobs would come back. And the America First thing had a lot of resonance because they felt white working class people, especially, and even minorities, even middle class minorities, felt that they were being shoved aside, and other people were getting advantages now unfairly, like the reverse discrimination to an extent. So, but Greg, yeah, I think your take on this is very good on target. Now, in terms of the extreme left and Marxist oneness, their role is a catalyst. And I think that's a valuable role. They're a catalyst to bring pressure on government to bring changes, as happened in the 20s and 30s, where you had socialist candidates that were getting some traction. You had strong union organizations, very aggressive. And in fact, FDR, who came from the upper class, he was considered a traitor to his own class, but yet I think objective observers say that he's the one who saved capitalism by instituting those reforms, because it was, it was heading towards a revolution in America, again, because of jobs, because of the working class being ignored. And that's what's going on. Trump was a Frankenstein monster created by the Democrats ignoring the working class and outsourcing all those jobs. So, if you want to blame somebody for the rise of Trump, blame the Democrats.
Democrats didn't outsource those jobs. They didn't. The Democrats aren't the ones that own all those monopolies and manufacturers.
They passed NAFTA.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who passed NAFTA?
They did, but at whose behest? I mean, who really who owns and controls those jobs? Not Democrats.
You're right. You're right about
Hey,
that.
George Bush's administration basically wrote NAFTA. Clinton accepted it, but it was George Bush's administration that put it together.
Yeah, and Biden was a prime mover to admit China to the World Trade Organization and give them special trading status. Yeah, so all along they saw the opportunity to make a lot of money by working with China, bringing the jobs over there. And by the way, if you set up a corporation in China, you can only own 49% of it. The Chinese government owns 51%.
Well, they did make money for a while.
And they made a lot of money. They're still making a lot of money.
Still making money, yeah.
Yeah.
So Larry, what is the solution now that you've depressed us all? And I don't want to just have mass suicide, and we need more jobs. And Trump certainly didn't deliver the jobs to the working class people in the mid-continent. So what is your solution? How are we going to get out of this? Or should we just give up?
Well, again, and let me state again, I know Kent doesn't believe me, but I am not a big fan of Trump. However, I think he served a purpose in shaking up the system and hopefully would bring some pressure for change. So I'm not condoning everything Trump did or who he is. But I'm saying at the time, I think he needed somebody to shake up the system. It didn't turn out the way we had hoped it would, but in that way, he was a catalyst. Now, in terms of changing it, I don't see any way because both sides, both political parties, all the players and both sides are so attached to these special interests who fund their campaigns. They probably have a lot of private deals going on with them. So again, the system has two heads, Democrat, Republican, but their avarice is the same. So I don't see any real hope for change unless it becomes so disruptive in society, where you have a situation like in the 20s and 30s before FDR came along, where there was so much pressure for reform that they really do give the working class and the middle class a break. Beyond that, I don't know how it could be done.
Wow.
I mean, does anybody have ideas how it could be done? I mean, Greg, being a Marxist-Leninist, what can be inserted other than, I think, the valuable element of creating pressure on government for reform. But other than that, what do you think could be done?
Well, it's a race, isn't it? I mean, it's a race to have something emerge that will present itself as a pole or an opposition to what's going on. And some people invest in the squad.
I'm good, but I can't talk now because I'm in a meeting. I'll call
But
you
I
later.
think the idea is
I'll call you a
that
little
I mean, some people invest in the
stay out of
squad,
politics.
Okay.
and others, others invest in Bernie, and I think that's all good. But I think ultimately we're going to need a third party, and I don't know any way around it. I mean, the two-party system is kind of exhausted.
Or would a third party just split the vote and keep the establishment in power? As Trump actually pointed out, he said, "I'm not going to start a third party to just split the vote. Then we got nowhere." So
Yeah, but Trump is part of the problem. So I mean, it's going to take an investment a clarity on the part of the people to stick to a third party and build it. We've had people like Ralph Nader run actually rather successfully as a third party, was a Green, but he didn't build the Green Party. He didn't have a structure. As a bit of an anarchist in his approach to things. And others there have been third party attempts before, but they were based upon personality.
Maybe we need four parties.
Well, that would be great because the Democratic Party is tenuous. It's got a wing that's now progressive, but not listened to. And in the centrist corporate party, the Republicans have a corporate center, which is Mitch McConnell and crew. Then they have the Trumpites on even to the right or more extreme of that. So both parties would benefit by breaking. I don't know how to make that happen, but say if we had a left-wing party that existed and had some force in this country, the logic would open that up. But short of that, we can only maybe pray that the parties will break up.
Marcy, what do you think?
I think that good investigative reporting is the predicate for all this stuff. And saying specifically, exposing the way Ida Tarbell did, or Jack Newfield or Wayne Barrett at the Village Voice. who gave what to get what from which of the corrupt politicians in both parties, so that it's clear to people what I totally agree with both Larry and Greg, what the real world is. And then once more people understand, then some young people might get fired up and start organizing in a new way, a fresh way.
But you know, the problem is, through compounding the situation of trying to change things, is that the public, you know, despite the information age, despite education and information that's widely available, what it's devolving into is just camps, emotional camps, who see things, you know, in non-logical terms. And the schools are contributing to this by not teaching history anymore, not teaching logic anymore. You know, college used to be the liberal approach in the broadest sense, where they would teach you how to think, not what to think. But now college campuses are propaganda mills as well. And the people, especially, you know, with the dominance now of social media, everybody's on the media, and it's all, so much of it, you know, is not logical. It's emotional. It's feel good stuff, infotainment at the best. And so it's not, it's just the reverse. Just like when television came in, the promise was that it'd be an educational tool for the public. Well, of course, it was commercialized, and then it became, you know, far from an educational tool. The same thing is happening with social media, which is now displacing the old electronic media such as television. So again, that's a factor that I don't see is going to be easily to change its direction. Again, it's a trend that's very destructive.
I'm troubled by, Larry, your concern over Biden hiding from the press. You seem to be hiding from the widespread voter suppression that's going on. Of the two, I think that is the greater threat to our democracy.
Well, could you elaborate on the voter suppression?
43 states have laws proceeding through their legislatures which would limit Sunday voting, souls to the polls,
mail-in,
taking food and drink to people online to vote. These are measures aimed at limiting voting in highly Democratic areas and highly brown and black areas. In the white areas, there'll be more voting booths than people. And in the white areas, in the black areas, people will be waiting 7 hours in line. That's taking large numbers of older people out of the race. New Hampshire, out of voting. New Hampshire is making it very difficult, trying to make it difficult for college students to vote there. Are you unaware of the voter suppression efforts that are being conducted around the country?
I agree with what you're saying. However, I also see that as another example of a reaction, perhaps an overreaction to the abuses on the other side. You know, this mail-in balloting, this is a whole other thing we get into. Mail-in balloting, now they want to eliminate any kind of signature check, ID and all that. So that is ripe for fraud. Now, you know, again, we've got two extremes here, but you know, mail-in balloting, I think is just, you know, a device that could easily be used by either side to fix an election. And it's.
But they found no evidence of it.
There's no evidence of it?
They found
no evidence of it being a big deal problem.
Well, when you say there's no evidence.
We know the right wing wants to limit the numbers of Americans who can vote.
Oh, yeah.
Because they see the numbers as a big threat to their interests. I mean, that's just,
You ready to go?
Right, I agree, I agree. But the way to
Yeah, but
go,
it doesn't address the question of having something to vote for.
well, that's
I mean, I
another-
think this is an important issue. It's a very important issue, and it's a historic issue because it's always been present from the time of poll taxes. And certainly the powers that be recognize the fact that so-called quote unquote minorities are growing in size in this country. And it's projected that by 2035, 2040, they would be a majority.
2042 is what Isabel Wilkerson says.
Okay, I go back to that book, I forget the authors, but in any case, it's imminent. It's around the corner. And so there's clearly going to be an interest in shaping that, just as gerrymandering shapers that. But it's based upon the balance of political power. And until we change the balance of political power, this is just theory. And the way you change the balance of power is get people to vote. I mean, people don't vote in this country.
No.
Most of them, I mean, many aren't registered, and those that are don't vote because they have nothing to vote for.
and they make it a hassle to vote. I mean, there's no reason that people shouldn't be able to vote.
And they agree with Larry that everybody's a liar, everybody's a politician.
and there's more and more evidence, I think, of that.
No, there was always a lot of evidence of
Yeah.
that. There's never
Not
been
as much.
time without that evidence.
Yeah, not to this extreme. Yeah, politics has always been corrupt, but not to this extreme. And since it
Oh, yes, more.
Since it continue, well,
Does anyone know why? I mean, does anyone have an idea why it's becoming more corrupt, or if it is becoming more
I
corrupt?
don't think it is more corrupt. I don't think so.
Well, I
You
think
long for the old Democratic Party. I don't.
Larry would know
Party
better
of
than
the
me,
Dixiecrats.
but I think it
I
was
don't long for the past.
I think it was 1987, I think, but he can correct me, that they changed the fairness doctrine in the media.
Yeah.
Up till that time,
Yeah.
you had to represent both positions. You couldn't be
Right.
on Fox News and represent one. You couldn't be on CBS and represent another. You had to represent both. And I grew up with that. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that well.
All of us.
They changed it. They deregulated, which is
Reagan-
the story of America in the last
Reagan-
years. And
Reagan,
so you created a competition between networks.
Yeah, and who
And
won
these
a lot?
competition became estranged around politics, around political polls. And now we have the mess we have. And so of course, it's entertainment. Trump was entertaining. That's why
Yeah.
people
Oh,
they
yeah.
put him in the media.
No, and
He was entertaining like a train wreck.
Yeah, yeah. And they like that. That's why they like Lady
couldn't stop
Gaga's
looking.
dogs. Like Lady Gaga's dogs being lost or stolen or whatever. It's the same phenomena.
I subscribe to the theory that Ezra Klein had, which is that in the past, we had segregationists in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party.
Joe Biden.
And so each party sort of had to contend with this. They wound up with a very discriminatory area of agreement. And because there was an area of agreement, you could be more gentlemanly because it left all the smaller groups out. Now that you had the Dixiecrats go over to the Republican Party, we're more polarized. And it's not that we have more people who think that way, it's just that we're sorted. As Ezra Klein says, we've now sorted ourselves out into parties that match our ideas. And this causes a problem. You can't even agree on what the news is anymore. In the past, I never agreed with the news. I always thought it was slanted against me. But everybody else thought it was the news. Now we're just noticing that it's been sorted. There hasn't been anything more venal entered into our life. It's just that they're sorted out and you can see it more clearly. And it causes difficulties in communicating and in cooperating.
Well, I think a lot of things have changed
right.
Since 1987. One is the rise of political consultants for both parties who are paid very, very well to never discuss anything that's real and just do branding and marketing and winning. And another thing that's changed is the staggering increase in inequality of income and wealth, so that big boys can buy politicians much more easily and are encouraged to do that by the politicians advised by political consultants who think that's what politics is all about. And I worked a lot with Congress in the 1970s and saw a huge change from the 70s to the 80s, and then especially to the 90s. And one thing that I saw change was there were powerful leaders who actually led in good directions from both parties. And they were trustworthy people who had some principles, not all, but that they would stand up for no matter what. And Stafford of Vermont, a Republican of Vermont, was an example of that on environmental issues. And when wealthy special interests tried to make end runs around the basic environmental laws that Congress had passed in the 70s, Stafford said no, just no. And because he was chair of a powerful public works and or appropriations committee, everybody listened when he said no. But he wasn't saying no just to get more for himself or his wife or whatever. He was saying no for really good reasons.
Certainly, large amounts of money in politics is a problem. If I had somebody working for me who said, well, I'll give you 40 hours a week, but 20 of those, I have to go and do my own thing, raise money, which is what all politicians do. I'd be a little pissed off, frankly, that they were only giving me 20 hours a week. So I think it would be nice if we could eliminate some of that. I don't know how to do it, but it would be nice to eliminate that influence of money.
What you should do is make corporate donation campaign contributions illegal. To me, it's just legalized bribery. You know, who are they going to listen to? Some millionaire who gives them $500,000, or me if I call and maybe I donated $10. So yeah, that's how it's controlled. You know, these donations, and plus again their business interests and the revolving door. You know, the agencies that are supposed to regulate a lot of these industries, the regulators, when they leave office, they get a posh job with the industry, the very industries that they were regulating. So I mean, it's all fixed every way you look at it, which is why it's so difficult to change. Greed on both sides, all sides, that's the primary motivation, as it has been since time immemorial. It's just that with modern technology and societal structure, I think it's more easy to do that more intensely now than it had been before, although it always existed. Tammany Hall in New York City back in the 1800s, prime example. But now it's become so pervasive at all levels that this is very destructive. And again, I don't know how you fix that. I would start with outline campaign contributions.
Is it possible to do that?
Citizens United.
May I ask, I think this is a question that concerns all of us. I'm just wondering, what are the prospects for reactivating the kind of left pressure that both Larry and Greg think is essential to pushing the other forces to making any change? And what can any of us do to help make that happen?
Good question.
We don't have a strong socialist left party now. Is it likely to come? I think so, but what's going to have to happen in order for it
Well,
to?
we see movements like Democratic Socialist of America, DSA, which I knew it back when it was a merger between a small youthful left-wing sect and an old Michael Harrington sect. And
Right.
it remained a sect, even though they both joined for a long time, and then it exploded with Bernie Sanders. So that group has grown, but it's made a lot of mistakes, which of course it'll make. But I think my generation has a responsibility to share with the young people exactly what we know from our history, from our experiences, people involved in the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. Telling them about the mistakes that were made is as important as celebrating the victories of those times, because they're going through some of the same mistakes. I mean, we have like a rebirth of SDS kind of thinking, which went nowhere. Some of the nationalism movements that occurred in the 60s and 70s didn't really take things anywhere. So we've got to put what we know back into young people and invest in it. And that means we've got to write, we've got to encounter, engage, be where they are, and talk about these things. So that's a very modest proposal, but I think that's where we are. We're at the stage of modest proposals.
Yeah, but
I gotta go.
Okay, well, we've been talking for an hour and 26 minutes. And,
Well,
that should be the end of it. Is everybody okay?
Yep.
yeah, well,
Thanks.
Yes.
Well, thanks
Good to
very
see
much.
you guys.
Great.
Enjoyed it.
Discussion.
Enjoyed it.
very much, Larry, and
To see all of you.
hey,
great.
George, can you
See
see
everybody next week.
good
All right.
discussion.
All right, thank you.
Good discussion. Thank you all.
Hey, George, can you